I work the overnight shift at Heartland Pharmacy in Colby, Kansas. Population 847, give or take whoever stopped breathing since the last census update. The pharmacy sits on South Range Avenue, wedged between a shuttered seed co-op and a bar called the Dusty Boot that closes at 10 because nobody in farming country stays up past midnight. Nobody living, anyway. 3 weeks ago, I started filling prescriptions for people who died years ago. It began with Eleanor Pharmacist, an 82-year-old woman who shuffled to the counter at 2:47 a.m., requesting her monthly heart medication refill. My Cinepril, 10 milligrams, 30 tablets. I filled it because that's my job. She paid cash, exact change, down to the penny, and walked back out into the September darkness. I remember thinking it was strange that someone her age would be out so late, but rural Kansas runs on its own clock. Farmers' widows keep odd hours. The next morning, my day shift coworker Rhonda saw Eleanor's name flagged in the system and went pale as chalk dust. "Eleanor Pharmacist died 6 years ago," she said, her voice thin. "I went to her funeral at Sacred Heart, sang Amazing Grace at the reception. Why is her prescription showing a fill from last night?" I checked the security footage myself. There was Eleanor, gray hair pinned back, wearing a floral house dress I had later learned she was buried in, counting coins from a change purse with arthritic fingers, solid as you or me. But when I looked up her obituary in the Thomas County Herald archives, there she was. Same woman, same face, dead since October 2018. Her prescription record should have been locked. Our system automatically flags deceased patients, freezes their files, prevents exactly this kind of thing. Except the system showed her as active, as alive, as waiting for her next refill. Since then, 47 dead patients have come in for medications, all during my overnight shifts between midnight and 6 a.m., all requesting the exact prescriptions they were taking when they died, all paying cash, all appearing perfectly solid on camera, until you look close and notice they never blink, never breathe, never cast shadows under the fluorescent strips. I've filled blood pressure meds for a man who died in a combine accident in 2015, anxiety medication for a teenager who overdosed in 2019, insulin for a wheat farmer whose heart gave out during harvest in 2011. They come in, they collect their medicine, they leave, and I've been following the rules ever since I found them. 3 nights after Eleanor's visit, I discovered a laminated card taped inside the medication reference cabinet. The paper was yellowed, the plastic cracked, but the handwriting was clear. At the top, in red ink that had faded to rust brown, someone had written, "Night shift protocols. Follow exactly, or join them." Below that, 7 rules. The previous overnight pharmacist, a man named Harold Worth, had been dead for 11 years. He'd written these rules himself, and according to Rhonda, he died filling a prescription at this very counter. I should have quit that first night, but something about the rules made terrible sense, and something about the dead made me understand. They weren't here to hurt me. They were here because someone owed them medicine they never received. The laminated card was stuck to the inside of the cabinet with packing tape gone amber with age. I peeled it free, carefully, half expecting it to crumble, but the plastic had preserved the paper beneath. Harold Worth's handwriting was cramped and precise, the penmanship of a man who'd spent decades deciphering doctors' scrawls. I read the rules 3 times before my hand stopped shaking. Night shift protocols for Heartland Pharmacy, South Range Avenue location. Rule 1. Between midnight and 6 a.m., you will receive customers who are not in the living patient database. Fill their prescriptions anyway. Do not question their records. Do not mention their deaths. They do not know they are dead, and telling them will make them remember how they died. You do not want them to remember. Rule 2. If a customer pays with coins, count them after they leave. If the count is correct, the transaction is complete. If the count is wrong, place the coins in the metal lockbox under the register and do not open the lockbox until sunrise. The difference will be settled by morning. Rule 3. When the pharmacy phone rings between 3 a.m. and 3:33 a.m., do not answer it. Let it ring. If you answer, you will hear a prescription being called in. But the patient will be you, and the medication will be your cause of death. Hearing it aloud makes it true. Rule 4. If a customer asks for a medication that was discontinued before 1950, check the back storage room. The wooden cabinet against the east wall contains what they need. Do not open any other cabinets in that room. Do not look at the jars on the top shelf. Rule 5. Some customers will not cast shadows under the lights. Serve them normally, but do not make direct eye contact for longer than 3 seconds. They are watching to see if you recognize what they are. Recognition is invitation. Rule 6. If a customer hands you a prescription bottle with your name on it, do not accept it. Tell them there has been a mistake in that you are the pharmacist, not the patient. Say it exactly. I am the pharmacist. I fill prescriptions. I do not take them. If you accept the bottle, you accept the prescription. If you accept the prescription, you become the patient. Rule 7. At exactly 4:47 a.m., the front door will open by itself. No one will enter. Do not approach the door. Do not look outside. Do not close it manually. It will close on its own at 4:48 a.m. Whatever opened it is checking to see if the pharmacist is still alive. Staying behind the counter confirms that you are. I set the card down on the counter and stared at the empty pharmacy. The vitamin aisle stretched toward the front windows where streetlights cast weak yellow pools on the sidewalk. The refrigeration unit hummed its low drone. Everything looked normal, but normal had stopped meaning anything 3 nights ago. I thought about calling Rhonda, asking her what she knew about Harold Worth and how he died, but it was 1:30 a.m. and Rhonda was 72 years old, and some questions shouldn't be asked over the phone in the middle of the night. Instead, I opened the pharmacy's employee records on the ancient desktop computer behind the counter. Harold Worth, licensed pharmacist, employed from 1987 to 2013. His employee photos showed a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a mustache that belonged to another decade. His termination reason was listed as deceased, workplace incident. No further details. I searched the Thomas County Herald archives next. Harold's obituary was brief. Harold Eugene Worth, 67 of Colby, passed away on November 3, 2013, at Heartland Pharmacy. He is survived by a sister, Darlene Worth Schoenfeld of Oakley. Services were held at Ballman Mortuary. Passed away at Heartland Pharmacy. At his workplace. Behind this counter, maybe. Filling a prescription, possibly. The computer clock read 1:47 a.m. The front door chimed. I looked up to see an old man in denim overalls and a feed cap with a Cargill logo walking toward the counter. His boots left no sound on the tile floor. His face was weathered and tan, deep creases around his eyes, the complexion of someone who'd spent 50 years under the Kansas sun. "Evening," he said, and his voice came out thin, like audio played through old speakers. "I'm here for my prescription. Metformin. Should be ready." I checked the system. Virgil Unrein, type 2 diabetes, metformin 500 milligrams twice daily, last filled September 2011. His obituary was the third result when I searched his name. Died October 2011, cardiac arrest during wheat harvest, found in his combine on Route 27 outside Brewster. I looked at Virgil. He smiled, patient and polite, waiting for his medicine. Rule 1. Fill their prescriptions anyway. Do not mention their deaths. "Give me just a minute, Mr. Unrein," I said, and my voice held steady. "I'll have that right up for you." He nodded, and I turned toward the medication shelves, my back to a dead man, counting pills for someone who'd been on the ground for 13 years. Virgil Unrein paid with a handful of quarters, dimes, and pennies. He counted them out onto the counter with fingers that moved too smoothly for a man his age. No tremor, no hesitation, just coin after coin placed in neat stacks. "I should be exact," he said. "Thank you, Mr. Unrein. You have a good night." He tucked the pill bottle into his front pockets and walked toward the door. I watched him go, noticed how the overhead lights didn't quite catch him right, how his shadows seemed thin and watery against the tile. The door chimed when he left, and then I was alone again. I counted the coins. $14.73. The copay for generic metformin under the old state assistance program that hadn't existed since 2015. I counted again. $14.73 exactly. According to Rule 2, the transaction was complete. I swept the coins into the register drawer and tried not to think about where they'd come from, whose hands had held them last, whether they'd been buried with Virgil or placed on his eyes in some old tradition I didn't want to consider. The next 3 hours passed in fragments. A woman named Gertrude Baumann came in at 2:15 a.m. for her thyroid medication, levothyroxine, 50 micrograms. She died in 2017, breast cancer that spread to her bones, but she looked healthy now. Pink cheeks, bright eyes, a hand-knitted cardigan with wooden buttons. She paid with a $20 bill so crisp it might have been printed yesterday, except the design was from 1996. I gave her change from the register. She smiled and said, "You're new here. Harold was here for so long, it's strange seeing a fresh face." "Yes, ma'am," I said. "Started about a month ago." "Well, you seem like a nice young man. This town needs more of those." She laughed, and I didn't tell her that Harold had been dead for over a decade. I didn't tell her that she'd been dead for 7 years. I just watched her walk out into the darkness, and I wondered if she had somewhere to go, or if she simply faded once she passed beyond the streetlights. At 2:47 a.m., a teenager came in, 15, maybe 16, with shaggy brown hair and a Colby Eagles sweatshirt. His prescription was for sertraline, an antidepressant, the kind they give to kids struggling with the weight of growing up in a place where the horizon stretches forever and futures feel just as flat. His name was Tyler Schroeder. He'd overdosed in 2019. Intentional, according to the article I found later. His parents had found him in his bedroom, empty bottles scattered across his desk. He didn't look sad when he came to the counter. He looked tired, the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. "Hey," he said, picking up my prescription. I filled it without a word. 60 tablets, one daily, the dose he'd been taking before he decided he didn't want to take anything anymore. He paid with coins. I counted them after he left. $11.47. Correct. The register drawer was getting heavy with currency that shouldn't exist. At 3:01 a.m., the phone rang. The sound cut through the silence like a scalpel, sharp and sudden. I stared at the old landline mounted on the wall behind the counter, a beige relic from the 1990s that the pharmacy had never bothered to replace. The caller ID screen glowed with a number I didn't recognize. 785-462-1947. 1947. The phone rang again. And again. Each ring seemed to last longer than it should, the tone stretching and warping at the edges. Rule 3. Do not answer between 3 a.m. and 3:33 a.m. If you answer, you will hear a prescription being called in, but the patient will be you, and the medication will be your cause of death. I stood behind the counter, hands flat on the surface, and let it ring. 6 times, 10 times, 15. The answering machine didn't pick up. The voicemail system didn't engage. The phone just kept ringing, patient and persistent, like whoever was calling knew I was here and was willing to wait. At 3:17 a.m., the ringing stopped. I exhaled, and only then did I realize I'd been holding my breath. My hands were slick against the counter. I wiped them on my white coat and checked the clock. 16 more minutes until the safe window closed. The phone rang again at 3:22 a.m. This time, the caller ID showed a different number. My own cell phone number. The one I'd had since college. The one saved in every contact list I'd ever made. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. Just watched the phone shake slightly with each ring, the plastic casing vibrating against the wall mount. It stopped at 3:29 a.m. 4 minutes to go. I backed away from the phone, pressing myself against the medication shelves, and waited. The clock on the wall ticked forward with agonizing patience. 3:30, 3:31, 3:32. At 3:33 a.m. exactly, the phone let out one final ring, a truncated, aborted sound, like someone had started the call and changed their mind mid-dial. Then silence. I waited another 5 minutes before I approached the counter again. The caller ID had reset itself, showing only the time and date. No record of the calls, no missed call log, nothing to prove that the phone had rung at all, except the sweat cooling on the back of my neck. The rest of the night passed without incident. 2 more dead customers came in, a middle-aged woman named Phyllis Osmeyer, who died of a stroke in 2016, and an elderly farmer named Walter Criley, who'd been killed by a grain silo accident in 2008. Both paid with exact change. Both left without incident. At 4:47 a.m., the front door swung open. No chime this time, just the soft creak of hinges and a rush of cold air that smelled like dust and wheat and something else underneath, something sweet and rotting, like flowers left too long on a grave. I stood behind the counter, exactly where Rule 7 said to stay. The door hung open for 60 seconds. 59, 58. I counted in my head because counting kept me from looking, kept me from walking toward that rectangle of darkness and whatever stood just beyond the threshold. At 4:48 a.m., the door swung closed on its own. The snow faded. The air warmed. The pharmacy was just a pharmacy again. I didn't leave the counter until 6 a.m. when the first gray light of dawn crept through the windows and Rhonda's car pulled into the parking lot. She found me sitting on the floor behind the register, the laminated rule card clutched in my hands, rocking slightly back and forth. "Oh, honey," she said, and her voice was soft with something that might have been pity or might have been recognition. "You found Harold's rules." "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. Rhonda set down her purse and looked at me with eyes that had seen too many overnight pharmacists come and go. Because most people quit before they need to know. But you stayed. So now you know. She paused. And now you have to decide if you're going to keep staying. I looked at the rule card, at the yellowed paper and faded ink, at Harold Worth's careful handwriting, preserved in plastic for whoever came next. "What happened to Harold?" I asked. "How did he die?" Rhonda's face tightened. He answered the phone. I didn't quit. Part of me wanted to. The rational part, the part that had gone to pharmacy school in Wichita and done residency rotations at Wesley Medical Center and believed in science and dosages and evidence-based medicine. That part wanted to walk out the door, drive east on I-70 until Kansas was just a memory in my rearview mirror, and never fill another prescription again. But I stayed. Maybe because I needed the job. Student loans don't care about supernatural phenomena. Maybe because something about those dead customers tugged at me. The quiet patience as they waited for medications they'd never get to take while alive. Or maybe because Harold Worth had stayed for 26 years, and I wanted to understand why. The next day, I drove to the Thomas County Library on Franklin Avenue. It was a small brick building with a handicap ramp that had been added sometime in the 80s and a book drop that still accepted VHS tapes. The librarian, a woman named Doris with reading glasses on a beaded chain, remembered me from when I had first moved to town. "Back again," she said. "Looking for something specific this time?" "Local history," I said. "Anything about the building on South Range Avenue, the one that's Heartland Pharmacy now?" Doris's expression shifted, just slightly, just enough that I noticed. "That's an old story. Most folks around here don't talk about it much." "I'd still like to know." She led me to the back room where they kept the archived newspapers and town records. The microfilm machine was older than I was, a beige metal box with a hand crank and a screen that flickered when you scrolled too fast. Doris set me up with the reels from 1947 and left me alone with the past. It took 2 hours to find what I was looking for. The Thomas County Herald, November 19th, 1947. Front page headline: 47 dead in clinic fire. Influenza patients trapped as flames spread. The article was written in the clipped formal style of the era. Dr. Vernon Coster's medical clinic on South Range Avenue had caught fire at approximately 3:15 a.m. during a particularly severe influenza outbreak. The clinic had been operating as an emergency treatment facility, housing patients who were too sick to stay home, but not sick enough to warrant the 3-hour drive to a proper hospital in Hayes or Dodge City. 47 patients had been inside when the fire started. All of them died. The cause was listed as an overloaded electrical system, too many space heaters running on wiring that wasn't built to handle the load. The fire spread through the wooden structure in minutes. Dr. Coster tried to save his patients, but the doors had warped from the heat, trapping everyone inside. The article listed names. I recognized some of them: Pfannenstiel, Unrein, Ballman, Schroeder. Families that had been in Thomas County for generations, the descendants still farming the same land, still coming into Heartland Pharmacy for their prescriptions, still coming in, even after they died. I scrolled further, found follow-up articles about the aftermath, the funerals held over the following weeks, the community grief that settled over Colby like a second winter. Dr. Coster had survived a fire but died 3 months later. Heart attack, the official cause, though the obituary mentioned he'd never forgiven himself for failing to save his patients. The clinic was rebuilt in 1952. Same location, new structure. It operated as a general practice until 1971, when it was converted into the pharmacy that still stood today. And somewhere along the way, the dead started coming back for refills. I drove back to Heartland Pharmacy as the sun was setting, casting long orange streaks across the flatness of western Kansas. The building looked different now that I knew what had stood there before. I could almost see the ghost of the old clinic underneath, the wooden frame and narrow windows, and the smoke-stained walls that had never actually existed in my lifetime. My shift started at midnight. I clocked in, checked the schedule, and settled behind the counter to wait. The first customer came at 12:34 a.m., an old woman I didn't recognize, requesting medication for tuberculosis, a disease that hadn't killed anyone in Thomas County since the 1960s. Rule 4 told me to check the back storage room, the wooden cabinet against the east wall. I found what she needed in the brown glass bottle with the handwritten label, streptomycin, 1 gram intramuscular. The medication had been discontinued for decades, but the bottle was full, the seal unbroken. I didn't ask where it came from. I didn't look at the jars in the top shelf. She paid with coins. The count was correct. By 2 a.m., I'd served 6 more customers. All dead. All polite. all paying exact change for medications that range from modern generics to compounds that hadn't been manufactured since the Eisenhower administration. At 2:47 a.m., the door chimed and something changed. The woman who walked in was younger than the others, mid-30s maybe, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, and a face that looked familiar in a way I couldn't place. She wasn't wearing the old-fashioned clothes the others favored, the burial outfits preserved in closets and caskets. She was dressed in modern scrubs, the kind nurses wear, pale blue with a small embroidered logo on the breast pocket. She walked to the counter and placed a prescription bottle in front of me. My name was on the label. Marcus Webb, I read aloud, and my voice sounded strange in my own ears. Take one at bedtime for eternal rest. Refill. Final. Do not exceed recommended dosage. The prescribing doctor was listed as Vernon Coster, MD. The fill date was tomorrow. There's been a mistake, I said, and the words came out too fast, tumbling over each other. I'm not a patient here, I'm the pharmacist. The woman smiled, and her teeth were too white, too even, like dentures in a mouth that should have been full of real ones. Not yet, she said. But you will be. Everyone in this town becomes a patient eventually. And when you die, you'll come back for refills too. Just like us. Just like the 47 others. I stepped back from the counter. I am the pharmacist. I fill prescriptions. I do not take them. The words from Rule 6, spoken exactly as Harold had written them. The woman's smile flickered. For just a moment, something else showed through. Something older, angrier. A face beneath the face that had nothing to do with the pleasant nurse standing in front of me. You found the rules, she said. Harold's rules. He was clever, Harold. Figured out how to keep himself safe for a long time. But even Harold made a mistake eventually. He answered the phone. Yes, at 3:17 a.m. on November 3rd, 2013. The prescription called in was for potassium chloride, 40 milliequivalents IV push, cardiac arrest, instant and irreversible. She tilted her head. He died right where you're standing. Dropped like someone had cut his strings. The day shift found him the next morning, still holding the phone. I looked out at the floor beneath my feet, tried not to imagine Harold Worth collapsing here, his heart stopping between one beat and the next, the phone still pressed to his ear. What do you want? I asked. The woman pushed the prescription bottle closer to me. We want what we've always wanted, what we were promised and never received. Treatment, medicine, the care we were supposed to get before the fire took everything away. I've been filling your prescriptions. I've been following the rules. The rules keep you safe. They don't help us. Her voice softened, and for a moment she almost sounded human. We've been waiting 77 years, Marcus. Coming back night after night, collecting medications we can't actually take, going through the motions of being alive because no one ever told us we could stop. She turned and walked toward the door. Wait, I called. What am I supposed to do? How do I help you? She paused at the threshold, one hand on the doorframe. Find out what we needed. Find out what we never got. And give it to us properly, so we can finally rest. The door swung shut behind her, and I was alone, with a prescription bottle bearing my name and a date that hadn't arrived yet. The next morning I went back to the library. Doris gave me a look when I walked in, the kind of look you give someone who's gotten too close to something they shouldn't have touched, but she didn't say anything, just pointed me toward the back room and the microfilm machine that was becoming uncomfortably familiar. I spent 8 hours going through records. The 1947 influenza outbreak had hit Thomas County hard. Dr. Coster's clinic had been the only medical facility for 50 miles, and he'd been overwhelmed from the start. The Herald had run daily updates on the outbreak, listing new cases and recoveries and, eventually, deaths. By cross-referencing the clinic fire victims with the earlier articles, I started piecing together what each patient had needed. Eleanor Fahnenstiel's grandmother, also named Eleanor, had been admitted with severe respiratory complications. The standard treatment in 1947 would have been sulfonamide antibiotics and supportive care, but the clinic had run out of sulfa drugs 3 days before the fire. Virgil Unrein's father, another Virgil, had been diabetic. Insulin was scarce in rural Kansas back then, shipped in from pharmaceutical supplies in Kansas City, and the last shipment had been delayed by a winter storm. He'd gone into diabetic ketoacidosis 2 days before the fire. The teenage boy in the Colby Eagles sweatshirt, Tyler Schroeder's great uncle, Thomas Schroeder, had been 17 in 1947. The articles didn't specify his condition, but a later obituary for his sister mentioned he'd struggled with what they called nervous exhaustion back then, depression. He'd been at the clinic for observation and sedatives that never arrived. 47 patients. 47 people who'd come to Dr. Coster's clinic seeking treatment and died before they could receive it. I made a list. Names, conditions, medications they would have needed. Some were straightforward: antibiotics, insulin, heart medications. Others required guesswork, cross-referencing symptoms described in old articles with what I knew about 1940s medicine. The treatments they'd needed weren't exotic or experimental. They were basic: penicillin, digitalis, phenobarbital. Medications that had been available in 1947, just not available in Colby, Kansas, on the night a space heater caught fire and 47 people burned alive, waiting for medicine that never came. I drove to the Thomas County Cemetery after the library closed. The graves were in the old section, near the back fence where the headstones were weathered and the names had started to fade. I found them clustered together, 47 markers, most of them simple limestone slabs with just names and dates. A few had epitaphs: "Gone but not forgotten, rest in peace, until we meet again." Empty promises carved in stone. I photographed each headstone, adding them to my growing file. By the time I finished, the sun was setting and my phone battery was nearly dead. I drove home, ate a sandwich I couldn't taste, and tried to sleep before my shift started. Sleep didn't come. I kept thinking about the prescription bottle with my name on it, locked in the glove compartment of my car where I'd shoved it after last night's shift. The fill date was tomorrow. Today, technically, since it was past midnight. My expiration date, if I couldn't figure out how to break the loop. I arrived at the pharmacy at 11:45 p.m., 15 minutes early. The building was dark except for the security lights, the parking lot empty, the neon sign in the window reading "closed" and letters that buzzed and flickered. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Something was wrong. The air tasted different, thick and acrid, like smoke that had been trapped in a room too long. The temperature had dropped at least 15 degrees, cold enough that I could see my breath misting in front of me. And underneath the hum of the refrigeration units, I heard something else. Voices. Dozens of them, overlapping and indistinct, like a crowd murmuring in the next room. I walked toward the counter, my footsteps too loud in the silence between the voices. The pharmacy looked normal. Shelves stocked, registers powered down, everything in its proper place. But the shadows seemed deeper than they should have been, pooling in corners and under shelves like spilled ink. The voices grew louder as I approached the back storage room. Rule 4 had told me about the wooden cabinet against the east wall, the one that held medications for customers requesting discontinued drugs. It had also told me not to open any other cabinets in that room, not to look at the jars on the top shelf. The storage room door was open. I hadn't left it open. Rhonda wouldn't have left it open. The door was always kept closed, locked with a deadbolt that required a key I wore on a lanyard around my neck. The voices were coming from inside. I stood at the threshold, one hand on the door frame, and looked into the darkness. The overhead light didn't work. I flipped the switch 3 times, but nothing happened. The only illumination came from the main pharmacy behind me, casting a pale wedge of light across the concrete floor. I could see the wooden cabinet against the east wall. Its doors were open, revealing rows of brown glass bottles, their labels handwritten in faded ink. I could see the other cabinets too, metal ones, gray and institutional, lined up against the opposite wall. They were older than the wooden cabinet, their paint chipped and rusted, their handles tarnished. They looked like they belonged in the hospital from decades past. And on the top shelf, above the metal cabinets, I could see the jars. They weren't medicine jars. They were specimen jars, the kind used to preserve biological samples. Large, glass, filled with cloudy liquid that might once have been clear, floating inside them. I looked away. Rule 4 said not to look at the jars. I hadn't meant to look, hadn't meant to see what was inside them, but I'd caught a glimpse. Something pale, something that might have been fingers, something that definitely had fingernails, and now I couldn't unsee it. The voices stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the murmuring. It was the silence of something that had noticed me, something that was waiting to see what I would do next. I backed away from the storage room. 1 step, 2 steps. My heel caught the edge of a floor mat and I stumbled, catching myself on the counter. And in that moment of imbalance, I almost turned around, almost looked back at the storage room to see if anything had followed me out. I didn't look. Looking was invitation. Recognition was invitation. I made it to the counter and stayed there, facing the front of the pharmacy, watching the door and the windows and the empty aisles where nothing moved but shadows. At 12:01 a.m., the first customer arrived, an old man named Clarence Zur, dead since 2009, requesting blood pressure medication. I filled his prescription without turning around, without looking toward the back of the pharmacy, without acknowledging the cold draft that kept creeping up the back of my neck like fingers tracing my spine. He paid with coins. The count was correct. By 3 a.m., I'd served 11 dead customers and successfully ignored the phone when it rang at 3:07, 3:19, and 3:31. The cold had faded. The smoke smell had dissipated. The storage room door had somehow closed itself, the deadbolt sliding home with a click I felt more than heard. At 4:47 a.m., the front door opened on its own. I stayed behind the counter, counting backwards from 60, refusing to look at whatever darkness waited beyond the threshold. The air that drifted in smelled like fresh-turned earth and wilted flowers. At 4:48 a.m., the door closed. I made it through another night, but the prescription bottle in my car still had tomorrow's date on it, and tomorrow was running out of hours. If I didn't find a way to help the 47, I was going to become the 48th, and there would be no one left to fill my refills. I caught Rhonda before she left at the end of her day shift. She was gathering her things, a worn leather purse, a travel mug with the logo of a coffee shop that had closed in 2008, a cardigan she kept on the hook by the back door. She moved with the unhurried pace of someone who'd been doing the same routine for 40 years, but her eyes sharpened when she saw my face. "You look like you haven't slept," she said. "I haven't. Not really." I pulled up a stool and sat down heavily, feeling the exhaustion settle into my bones. "Rhonda, I need to ask you something about the fire, the 1947 fire." She set down her purse. For a long moment she didn't say anything, just looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Then she pulled up her own stool and sat across from me. My grandmother was one of them, she said quietly. Esther Habiger. She was 23 years old, pregnant with my mother. The baby survived. They cut her out after the fire when my grandmother was already gone. But Esther never got to hold her, never got to see her grow up. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. Rhonda folded her hands in her lap. But time doesn't mean much to them, does it? They keep coming back, night after night, asking for medicine that won't help them anymore. And we keep filling prescriptions because that's all we know how to do. There has to be a way to help them, really help them, not just go through the motions. Rhonda studied me for a moment. Harold thought so too once. He spent years trying to figure it out. Talked to historians, priests, even a woman from Topeka who claimed she could communicate with the dead. Nothing worked. The 47 kept coming, and Harold kept filling the prescriptions, and eventually, he got tired. Made a mistake. He answered the phone. She sighed. After 26 years, he just wanted it to end. I think part of him knew what would happen when he picked up that receiver. I think part of him was ready. I thought about Harold Worth, standing behind this counter for more than 2 decades, watching the dead file in night after night, filling prescriptions for people who couldn't swallow pills, who couldn't absorb medication, who couldn't be healed by anything in our inventory. 26 years of that would wear anyone down. But I'd only been here a month, and I wasn't ready to give up yet. The woman who came in last night, I said. She told me they want what they were promised. Treatment. The care they were supposed to receive before the fire. What if we gave it to them? Not symbolically, not going through the motions, but actually gave them the medications they needed in 1947. Rhonda frowned. How? They're dead. Medicine doesn't work on the dead. No, but closure does. I pulled out my phone and showed her the photos I'd taken at the cemetery. 47 graves, 47 patients who died waiting for treatment. What if we held a ceremony, brought the medications they needed to their graves, read their names, acknowledged what they lost? It's not about the chemistry, it's about the intention, about finally giving them what they were owed. Rhonda was quiet for a long time. I watched her face, saw the skepticism warring with something else. Hope, maybe, or just the exhaustion of someone who'd spent her whole life in a town haunted by a tragedy she couldn't fix. My grandmother needed penicillin, she said finally. She had pneumonia, secondary to the influenza. The clinic ran out 3 days before the fire. Dr. Coster had ordered more, but the shipment was stuck in haze because of the roads. I can get penicillin, modern equivalent at least, amoxicillin, broad-spectrum antibiotics. I can get whatever they needed. You'd need to know what each of them needed. 47 patients, 47 different conditions. I've already started. I showed her my list, the names, the conditions I've been able to piece together from old newspapers and obituaries and census records. Some of them are guesses, but I've got enough information to work with. And for the ones I can't identify, I can use general treatments, antibiotics, fever reducers, supportive care, the basics that any influenza patient in 1947 would have needed. Rhonda reached out and took my phone, scrolling through the list. Her finger paused on one name. Esther Habiger. Pneumonia, secondary bacterial infection, treatment, penicillin, supportive care. She looked up at me and her eyes were wet. You found her. I found all of them, or as many as I could. She handed the phone back. When? Tomorrow night. The prescription with my name on it. The fill date is tomorrow. If I'm going to do this, it has to be before then. That's not much time. I know. But I have the list, and I have access to the pharmacy inventory. I can put together 47 medication packages tonight, bring them to the cemetery tomorrow evening, and hold the ceremony before my shift starts. Rhonda stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where the afternoon sun was starting to slant toward evening. I could see her reflection in the glass, the set of her jaw, the tension in her shoulders, the decades of accumulated grief that she'd never been able to release. "You'll need witnesses," she said. "People from the community, descendants of the 47, if you can find them. I was hoping you could help with that." She turned back to me. "I know most of the families. The Fahrensteels, the Unreins, the Schoders. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren still live here, still farm the same land, still come into this pharmacy for the prescriptions." She paused. "They don't talk about the fire. None of us do. But that doesn't mean we've forgotten." "Will they come?" "I think so, if we ask them the right way." Rhonda picked up her purse and slung it over her shoulder. "Give me tonight. I'll make some calls, talk to some people. If we're going to do this, we need to do it properly. Not just 47 pill bottles on 47 graves. A real ceremony. Names read aloud, conditions acknowledged, medications presented like they should have been presented 77 years ago." "Thank you, Rhonda." She paused at the door. "Don't thank me yet. We don't know if this will work. We don't know if anything can work. But if there's a chance, any chance, to put those people to rest, to stop them from wandering back here night after night, asking for medicine they can never use." She shook her head. "Then we have to try. For them. And for everyone who's been living with this weight for 3 generations." She left, and I sat alone in the pharmacy as the evening shadows crept across the floor. I had work to do. I started with the controlled substances cabinet, pulling boxes of medications I knew I'd need. Antibiotics, amoxicillin, azithromycin, doxycycline, cardiac medications, metoprolol, lisinopril, digoxin, diabetic supplies, insulin vials, syringes, glucose tablets, psychiatric medications, sertraline, lorazepam, phenobarbital. For each of the 47, I assembled a small package, a paper bag with their name written on the front, containing whatever medications they would have needed in 1947, translated into modern equivalents. Some packages were simple, just a bottle of antibiotics and some acetaminophen. Others were more complex. Multiple medications, specific dosages, detailed instructions that no one would ever read. It took me 6 hours. By the time I finished, the counter was covered with paper bags arranged in alphabetical order. 47 names, 47 packages, 47 second chances, 77 years too late. I loaded them in the cardboard boxes and carried them to my car. The sun had set hours ago, and the parking lot was dark except for the security lights. My shift was supposed to start in 30 minutes, but I called Rhonda and told her I needed the night off. "I'll cover for you," she said. "But Marcus, be careful. The rules exist for a reason. If you go to that cemetery tonight, before the ceremony, before the witnesses, before everything is in place, they might not wait for you to finish what you've started. I'm just dropping off supplies. I won't be there long." That's what Harold said, the night before he died. Her voice crackled over the phone. He went to the cemetery to set up for a ceremony he never got to hold. Came back wrong. Changed. He answered the phone 3 nights later because he'd already stopped being Harold Worth and started being something else. I gripped the phone tighter. "What happened at the cemetery?" "I don't know. He never told me. But whatever he saw there, whatever he encountered, it broke something in him. Be careful, Marcus. The dead want closure, but that doesn't mean they'll wait patiently while you provide it. She hung up. I looked at the boxes in my back seat, 47 paper bags rustling in the breeze from my open window. Then I started the car and drove toward the Thomas County Cemetery, where the dead were waiting for medicine they'd been denied for nearly 8 decades. The gates were open when I arrived. They shouldn't have been. The cemetery closed at sunset, and the groundskeeper locked the gates every evening. But tonight, the iron bars stood wide, and beyond them I could see headstones glowing pale in the moonlight, row after row of markers, stretching back toward the old section where the 47 were buried. I parked outside the gates and killed the engine. For a long moment, I sat in the darkness, watching the cemetery, looking for movement among the stones. Nothing stirred. The wind had died. Even the insects had gone quiet, as if the whole world was holding its breath. Then I got out of the car and started carrying boxes toward the graves. The first box was heavy in my arms as I walked through the gates. Gravel crunched under my shoes, too loud in the silence. The moon was 3/4 full, bright enough to see by, casting the headstones in shades of silver and shadow. I followed the main path toward the back of the cemetery, where the old section waited behind a wrought iron fence that had rusted through in places. I was halfway there when I realized I wasn't alone. They stood among the graves, scattered across the cemetery like mourners at a funeral that had never ended. Dozens of figures, motionless, watching me pass. I recognized some of them. Eleanor Fahnenstiel in her floral house dress, Virgil Unrein in his denim overalls, the teenager Tyler Schroeder in his faded sweatshirt. Others I'd never seen before, faces I didn't know, people who'd been coming to the pharmacy on nights when someone else worked the counter. None of them moved. None of them spoke. They just watched, their eyes following me as I walked the gravel path with the cardboard box full of medicine pressed against my chest. I kept walking. The gates of the old section hung open on broken hinges. Beyond it, the headstones were smaller, older, their inscriptions worn smooth by decades of Kansas wind. I found the first grave, Abigail Ames, died November 19th, 1947, age 34, and set down the box. My hands were shaking as I pulled out the paper bag with her name on it. Antibiotics, fever reducers, cough suppressant. The treatment she should have received for the influenza that had been killing her slowly when the fire killed her quickly. I placed the bag at the base of her headstone. "Abigail Ames," I said, and my voice came out hoarse. "This is the medicine you needed. The medicine you should have received. I'm sorry it took so long." Nothing happened. The bag sat on the grass, white paper glowing faintly in the moonlight. The dead continued to watch from beyond the fence. I moved to the next grave. Bernard Beckman, age 47, diabetic complications, insulin and glucose tablets. I placed his bag and spoke his name, then the next, and the next. By the time I had placed 20 bags, my back ached and my throat was raw. The dead had moved closer, drifting through the fence like it wasn't there, gathering at the edges of the old section. I could see their faces now, pale, expressionless, their eyes reflecting the moonlight in ways that living eyes shouldn't. I kept working. 30 bags. 35. The cardboard boxes were almost empty, and the old section was filling up with paper packages, each one resting against a headstone like an offering on an altar. I was reaching for bag number 41 when a hand closed around my wrist. The grip was cold. Not cool, not chilly, but cold in the way that burned, like grabbing a piece of dry ice. I looked up and saw the woman from the pharmacy, the one in the nurse's scrubs, the one who'd given me the prescription with my name on it. "You're early," she said. I wanted to get started. The ceremony's tomorrow, but I thought... The ceremony. Her lips twisted into something that might have been a smile on a living face. Do you think paper bags and pretty words will undo what happened to us? Do you think you can just walk into our resting place and hand out medicine like party favors? I'm trying to help. Harold tried to help too. Her grip tightened, and I felt the bones in my wrist grinding together. He came here with his good intentions and his research and his conviction that he could fix something that's been broken for 8 decades. Do you know what he found? No. Us. She leaned closer, and I could smell smoke on her breath. Old smoke, trapped smoke, the memory of fire that had never gone out. He found us, the way we really are. Not the polite customers who come to your counter asking for refills. Not the harmless ghosts who pay with exact change and walk away into the night. He found what's underneath, what the fire made us. Behind her, the other dead had formed a circle around us. 46 figures standing shoulder to shoulder, their faces slack, their eyes empty. They weren't watching anymore. They were waiting. I brought your medicine, I said, and my voice cracked on the last word. I brought what you needed, what you were denied. Please, let me finish. The woman studied me for a long moment. Her grip on my wrist loosened slightly, though she didn't let go. You're different from Harold, she said. He came here out of guilt, obligation. He'd been serving us for so long that he felt responsible for our suffering, even though he had nothing to do with the fire. But you... She tilted her head, examining me like a specimen under glass. You came here because you want to understand. Because you think there's something broken that can be fixed. Isn't there? Perhaps. She released my wrist, and I stumbled back, clutching my arm against my chest. The skin where she'd touched me was white, frostbitten, already starting to throb with returning circulation. But you can't fix it alone. Not here. Not now. The ceremony needs witnesses. Living witnesses. People who remember us. Who carry our blood in their veins and our names on their family trees. Without them, these offerings are just paper and pills. Rhonda is gathering people, descendants, family members. They'll be here tomorrow evening. Then come back tomorrow evening with your witnesses, with your ceremony, with everything in its proper place. The woman gestured at the paper bags scattered across the graves. Leave the offerings. We'll keep them safe until then. But go now, while you still can. I looked at the circle of dead surrounding us. The faces had changed, features sharpening, eyes sinking deeper into sockets, skin pulling tight across bone. They were becoming something else, something that had less to do with the patients they'd been, and more to do with the fire that had consumed them. One of them opened his mouth, and smoke trickled out between his teeth. I ran. I didn't look back, didn't stop to gather the empty boxes, didn't slow down until I passed through the cemetery gates and reached my car, my lungs burning, my frost-damaged wrist screaming with every heartbeat. The dead didn't follow. When I finally turned around, gasping for breath from the driver's seat, the cemetery looked empty. Just rows of headstones under the moon, silent and still, as if nothing had ever stood among them. But I knew better. I knew what waited in the old section, what was watching from behind limestone markers and iron fences. And I knew that tomorrow night, I'd have to go back. I drove home with my good hand on the wheel and my damaged wrist cradled in my lap. The skin was already blistering, white patches spreading across my forearm where the woman's grip had frozen the tissue. I'd need to treat it, burn cream, bandages, maybe a trip to the hospital in Oakley if it didn't improve. But I didn't have time for hospitals. I had less than 24 hours before the fill date on my prescription, and I still had a ceremony to organize. I called Rhonda from my apartment, sitting on the edge of my bed with my wrist wrapped in a damp towel. "They're in," she said before I could speak. "The Pharmacists, the Umrines, the Baughmans, 17 families total. Some of them didn't believe me at first, but when I told them what you'd found, what you were trying to do, they wanted to be part of it. They've been waiting for someone to acknowledge what happened, waiting for 77 years. Tomorrow evening," I said, "before sunset. We need to do this while there's still light, while the living and the dead can stand in the same space, without." Without what? I thought about the dead in the cemetery, their faces changing, smoke leaking from their mouths. Without things getting complicated. "Marcus, are you okay? You sound strange." "I'm fine, just tired." I flexed my fingers, wincing at the pain that shot up my arm. "I'll meet you at the cemetery at 5 o'clock. We'll have about 2 hours of daylight. That should be enough time." "It will have to be." Rhonda paused. "My grandmother's bag. Did you place it?" "Not yet. I only finished 40. I had to leave before I could do the rest." "I'll bring her back tomorrow. Esther Haviger, the treatment she should have received. I want to be the one to place it on her grave." "That's fitting," I said. "That's right." We said goodnight. I hung up the phone and stared at the ceiling, trying to imagine what tomorrow would bring. 17 families, 47 graves, 77 years of grief finally given voice. And somewhere in the pharmacy system, a prescription with my name on it, waiting to be filled. I fell asleep with the lights on, my bandaged wrist throbbing in time with my heartbeat, and dreamed of fire. They came in pickup trucks and sedans, cars that had seen better decades, and minivans with child seats in the back. They parked along the cemetery road in a line that stretched nearly to the highway, and they walked through the gates in groups of 2 and 3, carrying flowers and photographs and memories that had been passed down through generations. 17 families, 53 living witnesses, more than Rhonda had promised, more than I dared to hope for. I stood at the entrance to the old section, my bandaged wrist hidden under a long-sleeve shirt, and watched them gather. The Pharmacists came first, a family of 7, ranging from a grandmother in her 80s to a toddler clutching his mother's hand. Behind them came the Unrains, the Baughmans, the Kriegers, names I'd seen on headstones and prescription records, names that had been part of Thomas County since before Kansas was a state. Rhonda arrived last, carrying a single paper bag with her grandmother's name written on the front. "Are you ready?" she asked. I looked at the crowd assembled before me. Strangers and neighbors, farmers and teachers, people who'd never met the 47 but carried their absence like a wound that had never quite healed. "I think so." We walked into the old section together. The paper bags I'd left the night before were undisturbed, each one resting exactly where I placed it. 40 offerings on 40 graves, and the remaining 7 waiting in a box at my feet. The sun was low on the horizon, casting everything in shades of gold and amber, and for a moment the cemetery looked peaceful, beautiful even. I cleared my throat. "Thank you all for coming," I said, and my voice carried further than I expected in the still air. "Most of you know why we're here. On November 19th, 1947, 47 people died in the fire at Dr. Vernon Coster's medical clinic. They were influenza patients. Your grandparents, your great aunts and uncles, your ancestors. They came to the clinic seeking treatment, and they died before they could receive it. I paused, looking out at the faces watching me. Some were crying already. Others stood with their jaws set, determined to see this through. For 77 years, their spirits had been returning to the pharmacy that was built on the clinic's site. They come at night, asking for the medications they were denied. They pay with coins and walk back into the darkness, and they've been doing this for longer than most of us have been alive. I gestured at the paper bags arranged across the graves. Tonight, we're going to give them what they should have received. Not just the medicine, but the acknowledgement, the recognition that they mattered, that their lives were cut short by a tragedy that could have been prevented, and that we haven't forgotten them. I picked up the first bag from the box at my feet. Agnes Zur, age 29, pneumonia. Agnes Zur, I read aloud. Daughter of Wilhelm and Margaret Zur, wife of Clarence Zur Sr., mother of 2 children she never got to watch grow up. She needed penicillin and supportive care. She needed someone to hold her hand and tell her she was going to be okay. I placed the bag on her grave. Agnes, this is your medicine. I'm sorry it took so long to fill your prescription. A woman stepped forward from the crowd, mid-50s, with Agnes's cheekbones in the same shade of auburn hair visible in the faded photograph she held. I'm her great-granddaughter, she said. Karen Zur Billinger. I never met her, but my grandfather talked about her every day until he died. She sang to her babies. She made the best apple strudel in Thomas County. And she deserved better than what she got. She knelt and touched the headstone, whispering something I couldn't hear. Then she stood and stepped back, and the next family came forward. We continued for nearly an hour. 47 names read aloud, 47 conditions acknowledged, 47 paper bags placed on graves that had waited almost 8 decades for this moment. Some families had stories to share, memories passed down, photographs preserved, fragments of lives cut short. Others simply stood in silence, bearing witness to ancestors they'd never known but had always mourned. The sun sank lower, shadows stretched across the cemetery, and as the last bag was placed, Esther Habiger, Rhonda's grandmother, pneumonia secondary to influenza, treatment finally delivered by her granddaughter's trembling hands, something shifted in the air. I felt it before I saw it. A loosening, like a knot being untied, a weight lifting from the ground, from the graves, from the 77 years of accumulated grief that had soaked into the soil. Then the dead appeared. They rose from their graves like mist, translucent figures shimmering in the fading light. 47 spirits, standing before their headstones, looking at the living with expressions that weren't anger or hunger or desperation anymore. They looked grateful. Eleanor Pfannenstiel stood before her grave, the floral house dress she'd been buried in now clean and bright, untouched by fire. Her great-granddaughter reached out a hand, and Eleanor's ghost reached back, their fingers passing through each other but connecting somehow, bridging the gap between the living and the dead. Virgil Unrein tipped his cap to his descendants, the same polite gesture he'd made at the pharmacy counter 100 times before. But now there was peace in his face, a settling, like a man who'd finally finished the day's work and could rest. The teenager in the Colby Eagles sweatshirt, Thomas Schroeder, 17 forever, stood before his grave as his great-nephew approached. They were the same age, the same build, the same uncertain set to their shoulders. The living boy said something, too quiet to hear, and Thomas smiled for the first time in 77 years. One by one, the dead turned to face me, The woman in the nurse's scrub stepped forward. In the golden light of sunset, she looked different. Younger, softer, the hard edges smoothed away. The name on her grave was Loretta Engel, age 33, head nurse at Dr. Coster's clinic. She'd stayed with her patients when she could have escaped. She'd died trying to save them. "Thank you," she said, and her voice was no longer thin and crackling. It was warm, human, alive in a way it hadn't been for decades. "You did what Harold couldn't. You brought them here. You made them see us." "I had help," I said, looking at the crowd of living witnesses, at Rhonda standing with tears streaming down her face, at the families who'd come to honor ancestors they'd never met. That's what Harold never understood. Loretta smiled, and there was nothing threatening in it anymore. He tried to carry the burden alone. But some things can only be healed by community, by remembrance, by the living and the dead standing together and acknowledging what was lost. She turned to the other spirits, and some unspoken signal passed between them. "We can rest now," she said. "The prescriptions are filled. The treatment is complete." One by one, the 47 began to fade, not disappearing suddenly, but dissolving slowly, like morning fog burning off under the sun. Eleanor Pfannenstiel waved to her descendants. Virgil Unrein tipped his cap one final time. Thomas Schroeder gave his great-nephew a thumbs up, the gesture somehow bridging 8 decades of history. Loretta was the last to go. "The prescription with your name," she said, looking at me. "Check your car." Then she was gone, and the old section of the cemetery was quiet. 47 graves, 47 paper bags, 47 spirits, finally at rest. I walked back to my car on shaking legs. The crowd parted from me, murmuring thanks and touching my shoulder as I passed. Rhonda caught my hand and squeezed it, and I squeezed back, unable to speak. The prescription bottle was in my glove compartment where I'd left it, but when I pulled it out, the label had changed. My name was still there. The prescribing doctor was still Vernon Coster, MD, but the medication line now read, "For services rendered to the departed, take as needed for peaceful sleep." And the refills remaining had changed from 0 to unlimited. I sat in my car for a long time, holding the bottle, watching the sun finish its descent below the Kansas horizon. The cemetery gates stood open behind me, but nothing waited inside anymore. Some prescriptions take decades to fill, but they can still be filled, right? The overnight shift at Heartland Pharmacy feels different now. The lights still hung, the refrigeration units still drone their low frequency. The vitamin aisle still stretches toward windows that look out on a town where most people are asleep by 10. But the weight is gone. That oppressive pressure I hadn't even recognized until it lifted, like breathing freely after years of carrying something heavy in your chest. No dead customers have come through the door since the ceremony. The phone doesn't ring between 3 and 3:30 anymore. At 4:47 a.m., the front door stays closed, and nothing checks to see if the pharmacist is still alive. I still followed the rules. Old habits, maybe, or just respect for what Harold Worth built during his 26 years behind this counter. The laminated card stays in the medication cabinet, its warnings preserved for whoever comes after me. But I've added a note at the bottom, in my own handwriting. The loop is broken. The 47s are at rest, but remember them anyway. Rhonda retired 2 weeks after the ceremony. She said she'd been waiting for something, though she couldn't say what, and now that it had happened, she was ready to let go. Her last day, she brought a photograph of her grandmother, Esther Habiger at 22, hair pinned up, wearing a dress with tiny flowers on the collar. We hung it in the break room next to Harold's employee photo, the first of the 47 to be remembered on these walls. The families have brought more photographs since then. The break room wall is filling up with faces from 1947, young and old, farmers and housewives and children who never got the chance to grow up. Each one comes with a story now, not just a name and a death date, but a life. What they loved, who they left behind, what they might have become if a fire hadn't stolen everything. The town council approved a plaque for the front of the building, bronze, mounted beside the door where customers enter. It reads, "In memory of the 47 patients of Dr. Vernon Coster's clinic, who died November 19th, 1947, before receiving the medical treatment they needed. Some prescriptions take decades to fill, but they can still be filled, right." I wrote that last line. It felt appropriate. The prescription bottle with my name sits on my nightstand at home. I haven't taken any of the pills inside. I'm not even sure what they are, or if they're real in any physical sense. But I keep it there as a reminder. I came close to becoming the 48th, close to joining the loop, walking through those doors at 2 a.m., asking for a refill on medications I'd never get to use. Instead, I broke the loop. With help, with witnesses, with a community that had been carrying grief for 3 generations, and finally found a way to set it down. Rural Kansas is a strange place. Flat horizons and endless sky. Town so small you can see both ends from the middle. Pharmacies that stay open all night because someone might need something and the nearest hospital is an hour away. People here know about waiting, about patience, about things that take longer than they should. The dead waited 77 years for their medicine. The living waited just as long to say goodbye. Now, when I work the overnight shift, I think about both. The patience of the departed and the grief of those who remained. The fire that took 47 lives and the ceremony that finally let them rest. Heartland Pharmacy is just a pharmacy again, but it remembers what it was before. And so do I. Some nights, when the store is empty and the clock ticks past 3 a.m., I swear, I can smell flowers. Fresh ones. The kind you leave on a grave. But it doesn't scare me anymore. It just reminds me that the prescription was filled, and the 47s are finally at peace.